Well, welcome. Wanted to do this video to show some contrast between both red states and blue states and the cultures and the impact that the cultures have on the overall psychology of the entire population of the area in question. I am recording this through Facebook live stream, and I'm also doing an HD upload recording that I will have going up later. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk live with everyone here and go ahead and get some of these examples out there to help try to get some common ground between left and right and have people realize that this whole thing usually gets blown out of proportion in general with everything. So let me explain. Alright, for example, let's start with a left-sided issue. It's a hot button subject like BLM, Black Lives Matter, that whole movement. Now, that movement started in Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland is a state that is relatively blue for the most part, and on the East Coast as a whole has an issue still with some of that 1940s, 1950s mentality, social structure. So here we are, 2016 at this moment, and there's still an issue overall with racial tensions. And one could argue that that's the case all across the country. But I want to explain how one side will take a subject like this, like with Black Lives Matter, and they'll end up changing it to fit their narrative. They'll end up changing it to make it where it applies to them when it doesn't. So I start with BLM as the first subject to discuss because Black Lives Matter was a isolated movement that was addressing a situation in an area where police brutality is very real. So in Baltimore, Maryland, I don't know how many of you who are watching actually have been in Baltimore, but Baltimore, Maryland, for example, is a police state. They are highly militarized with their equipment, with their training and everything. They are battle ready at all times, and it's a big problem. Now, you take that into contrast and look at it from like out here, where I'm currently at, West Coast, Washington State, where the police don't have that militarized appearance. They don't have that, we're going to just knock everybody out and arrest them mentality. So the left uses a situation like Black Lives Matter and over-publicizes it to apply to basically like the entire country. So you have this issue where one small area, like Baltimore, has a police state. They have a corrupt judicial infrastructure that is like totally beyond repair at this point. They need the reset button hit. I mean, you can Google search plenty of articles out there of like correctional officers that are drug mules. Like there was an article, I think it was like 3 years ago, where they were talking about how like 19 or so correctional officers were drug mules, and they were actually funneling drugs into the system. Now, yes, that is a big problem. Does that happen all across the United States? I mean, I'm sure there's some corruption, of course, but you don't see that blatant militarized police state above the law mentality all across the entire United States. And then a lot of these states that are red, for example, they look at the outcry of like police brutality and they say, well, the police in my city, they're fine. Like, they're upstanding public servants. They make sure everybody's okay. They don't overstep their boundaries, etc., etc. So these red areas where the police actually are public servants, where they actually do look out for the community, and they do uphold the law, the Constitution, and they make sure everyone's okay. So to them, they look at that outcry from like Black Lives Matter and they say, well, hold up. This is a false movement. There's no way these cops are that bad. And from their perspective, they're right. They are right, because where they live, the cops are not that bad. So that's an example of the cultural differences between red and blue states. And individuals that have not lived in multiple areas, if you haven't lived in a blue and a red state at some point in your life, your view is going to be very one-sided. So if you grow up in a blue state, you're going to have this mentality that everything that the left produces is always 100%. And what they're saying against the right is always wrong. You know, that the right is never correct on any of their standing points. Because you're growing up in that environment where technically in your area, the right would be wrong. So in the red states, for example, so going back to the BLM thing, Black Lives Matter, they would say, no, this makes no sense. You know, I'm going to dismiss all their claims because it doesn't apply here. But if they always lived in that red state and they never saw what a militarized police state was like, how could they comprehend what these people on the left are even talking about? So that's where we have this cultural boundary just issue. We have this issue where people aren't seeing both sides. And as a libertarian personally, libertarianism takes a look at the whole spectrum. You know, we don't look at things from a left or right perspective. We look at it from the whole perspective. And we try to get an outline and become sort of centralist to what's happening. So that's why not all these issues apply to all places. But here, like for example, on the West Coast, Black Lives Matter movement, they push it really hard, yet you see most of the people that are protesting with Black Lives Matter in the West Coast are predominantly white individuals or Caucasian. And I'm not trying to be mean when I say that, it's just a physical observation. So we have this huge issue back like on the east side, the East Coast, where Black Lives Matter is a very relevant, very important cause. It's something that needs our attention. It's something in their area that it's very specific. Let's transition into the oil pipeline, for example, in North Dakota. So like the Native Americans there, they're fighting their fight because they are worried about their sacred ground being desecrated. They're worried about the pollution from the pipeline that could leak into the water, and they're upset that they were not properly consulted with during the legal process. So yes, the people that are doing the pipeline, they've got the paperwork. They can prove, yes, legally, we are allowed to do this. But I call it a bit of, kangaroo court style paperwork where they just rush it through as quickly as possible and use as much of this as they can to get their cause through. So the Sioux people did not get a chance to speak on the pipeline, for example. So now, for the last couple months, they have been defending their land and doing what they think is the right thing to do. And in all fairness, they have the right to want to protect their land. I don't care if somebody's got the legal paperwork or not. If you're going in and destroying someone's possibly home, essentially, you should at least talk to them and try to figure some common ground out before you go through and try to bulldoze the whole thing over. So what we see as of recent is that they are actually having protesters come in from all over the place. And these protesters don't really know the true cause that's happening. They don't understand the whole backstory. They don't know what's going on, etc., etc. And they're using it as an excuse to prop themselves up and be like, oh, look, we're here, we're helping. Meanwhile, we're provoking the police into attacking the crowds. And when the police begin to retaliate, even though the Native Americans didn't poke the stick at them to begin with, they're the ones that are getting shot at with pellet guns and tear gas and all this other nonsense. Water cannons and freezing weather, all that. So the left is provoking, essentially, these militarized police at the North Dakota oil pipeline, and they're attacking, and it's hurting the natives. So then they're propagating that up in the media and saying, hey, look, they're attacking the Native Americans. Meanwhile, they're the ones at fault for the police attacking the Native Americans to begin with. Because if you listen to individual reports of Native Americans on the front lines, there are people that are saying to these protesters, hey, you're not one of our group. Get out of here. Like, leave. And they have to pull them away from the front because they're provoking the police. So the right sees it as, oh, those stupid lefties, you know, they got nothing better to do. They don't have a job. They're just out there standing around, you know, causing trouble for no reason. And that's what the right media is portraying as the pipeline situation. Now, as a libertarian, you got to look at all sides. You got to look at the whole picture and say, well, I can see this side has their point. I can see this side has their point. And then you put all the information together, and you're going to find somewhere in the middle, ironically, of course, that there's the answer. Another cultural issue, problem with left and right, blue states, red states. So the Second Amendment, for example, okay, the red states, they understand that every amendment counts, that the Second Amendment is extremely important, that you have to have the ability for defense against enemies that are both domestic and foreign, whether that be a tyrannical government or a person breaking into your house. You have the Second Amendment right to have arms, to be able to defend yourself, to be able to defend your community. So the left looks at it and they say, well, they're just trying to push this, you know, they want everybody to have a nuclear weapon, you know, or like something like insane, you know, be like, oh, they got assault weapons, you know, like the AR-15, for example, is not fully automatic, and they always go back to that gun, the AR-15. They're like, oh, it's an assault weapon. It's fully automatic. It's got 50,000 rounds in it, and you can take down entire tanks with it. You know, they have this misconception because that's what's fed to them. And it's up to the Second Amendment people to display the information to the left side and say, hey, this is what we're supporting. We're not saying that everybody needs to walk down the street with an Apache helicopter. We're saying that these are the reasons why we have the Second Amendment. And it's up to that person, that individual on the left side, to take that constructive criticism and that information and process it. If they refuse to see where you're coming from, well, then that falls back on them. So it's the same thing like going back to the BLM thing. It's the same issue with the right, where you're explaining to them that, hey, guys, I understand in your area that the cops, that the public servants are public servants. Be like, we understand that, red state folks. We get it. But guess what? In our area, there's an issue with a militarized police state. And then you explain why. So at the same time, that person on the right, if they don't take that information in correctly and think of it with a critical thought, be like, oh, well, if there's a police issue in that area, then they definitely should deal with that police issue in that area. It's not a nationwide thing. A lot of these causes, a lot of these issues, they're not nationwide issues. They're issues that are specific for that area. And that's why you see this great big divide between the left and the right, where they're like, oh, well, you're totally crazy because you think all cops are bad. And they're like, well, you're totally crazy because you think that everybody needs a flamethrower that can destroy a building. I mean, of course, all flamethrowers probably potentially have the potential to level a building, but what I'm saying is, close their minds. They like totally block out all the facts, and they just listen to the narrative that they're used to. So if it's a blue state, they're only going to get their information one-sided, and they're going to look at the other side as the enemy. In a red state, they're only going to get their issues and information from the right side, and it's already constructed in a way that anything that is possibly justified for the left totally will just dismiss all that because that's not what they're used to. So we have a cultural diversity issue of information. We really need to make it where the average person doesn't just grab their information from the biased side. So if they're in a red state, they can't just watch Fox News. They can't just read conservative articles. If they're in a blue state, they can't just watch NBC and CNN. They've got to actually look outside of things like the Huffington Post and all this other stuff where they're so extreme to the one way or the other. And that's why mainstream media in general is dying, because they never look at anything from a central standpoint. If you look in the middle between both sides, like I said earlier, you're going to find the answers that you're looking for. So like with the oil pipeline, yeah, they've got the paperwork. Okay, right, we get that. But guess what? They basically bought their way through the court system to get that, and they, rubber stamps and all the other stuff along the way. I don't know all the details, but, we understand that there's a criminal justice system that needs reformed. Going along with that, the criminal justice system. A lot of people in red states will be like, well, it works just fine, the criminals get prosecuted, they get what they deserve. And then on the left side, they're like, not everyone's a criminal, innocent until proven guilty. You should constructively give both sides a chance to form a argument, and in the court of law, one way or another, it'll be settled. And that's how the left looks at it versus the right. The right has that more, that the law is never wrong, that you're just a hippie if you try to challenge the court system, etc., etc. That's because those folks on the right-hand side have never had to really fight in the court system. So it's a biased perspective because the red state media tells them court systems are great. Anyone that's telling you that they're wrong is a leftist communist and they're a pinko and that don't listen to them. It's just communism. And the left is like, no, this is what you need to look at. And if the right would constructively look at it and say, oh, we do have corruption in our courts, we do need criminal justice reform, then the left would be like, yes, exactly. On the flip side, the left abuses a lot of the problems with the court system. They'll use one example where there was legit corruption, and they'll try to make it apply to the whole scenario of like all cases. Be like, okay, well, this case right here, let's refer to this other case that's similar to it where racial bias was involved. Okay. All right, is there any credit, is there any merit to your accusations? So you look at both cases and you see that the left media just highlighted what could have made the cases look similar, and they always, on the left side, would try to make it look like everyone's always innocent, which that's not the case. There are plenty of actual criminals that do need to be punished. What that punishment is still open for debate overall, but they have that issue where on the left they think everyone is always innocent no matter what. So personally, growing up in a mixed area, it was both heavy red and heavy blue. So you got all these conflicting ideologies all the time, and maybe perhaps that's why I was always centralist even since I was a young child, because I never really affiliated myself with either of the two main political parties in general, because they both would not look at each other's viewpoints. They just would always look at the one side. One side red only. Only things that red media is telling me I need to listen to. Blue side is like only thing that blue media is telling me I need to listen to. So again, going back to the mainstream media dying, this biased narrative that you're either Republican or Democrat is what has really toxified society. And it is by design. I mean, let's face it. The mainstream media is owned by a handful of corporations. How is that unbiased? You know, when your news is funneled from 6 major corporations that all have agendas of their own to begin with, and who's funding them? Well, the big money bankers that are obviously the ones that can afford it. So we're getting 325 million people plus in the United States, and everyone's getting their information essentially from 6 companies. That's not diversified. That's going to be one-sided all the way around, whether it's right-sided media or left-sided media. So that's why the mainstream media is dying. And I'm glad. And I'm glad that people are realizing that they're just trying to pit each other, both sides, against each other. And while we're all distracted, fighting each other, whether we're Republican or Democrat or whatever you identify as, with us all butting our heads together, they're laughing their butts off because we're all fighting each other, realizing that the true enemy is the one behind the dollar. You will always find your answers if you follow the money trail. You must always follow the money trail. All answers can be found when you see where the bucks are coming from. So we have to look at both sides. I know that it's not consciously something that we do, but we need to start doing it. So just because an article comes out from the left doesn't mean that you dismiss the whole thing. Or if an article comes out from the right, you don't dismiss the whole thing. Dr. Kent Hovind has a great saying that I have always gone by when it comes to media, journalism, politics in general. So as an editor myself, you have to use this formula. When you have a chicken, this is Dr. Kent Hovind's quote, it's paraphrased of course. When you have a chicken, okay, do you eat the entire chicken? No, you do not eat the entire chicken. You take the meat and you throw away the bones. You toss them. You do not choke on a bone and try to die by consuming the entire chicken. So it's that way with media as well. That's with the information that you're getting. You must take the meat of it and toss away the bones. So if the information you're getting seems like it's too biased one way or another, it probably is. And you should probably check out to see what the other side's saying about the exact same issue. So whether it be the oil pipeline in North Dakota, whether it be Black Lives Matter, the militarized police state, I mean, anything and all things. The rights of a woman when it comes to whether she should choose or if you're pro-life, I mean, that's our problem. People are still not looking at the whole picture. They're still falling into that one narrative, whether it be left or right. And they're not centralizing the information. So we need to. It's what we got to do. We've got to centralize the information, take it from all sides, and then somewhere in the middle, you're going to find the answer. Appreciate you watching. Have a good night, guys. And when it comes to this kind of thing, listen to what they're saying on the left. Listen to what they're saying on the right. And somewhere in the middle is the answer. Catch you guys later.